Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 53. It starts by wasting our time with Zelda's ex-husband reminding us about the prenup clause for an entire page. And since he tells Sabrina what he was reminding Hilda about in the span of one panel, there is no excuse for all the panels before this. He says that today is the deadline to remarry him before midnight or she'll lose her powers. Why doesn't she just conjure up a man to marry or brainwash him into agreeing to it? She could let him go afterwards. He warps away, and Zelda tells Hilda that she couldn't find a loophole in the contract. She thanks Salem for showing pity for her, and then tells him to get out for asking for a room when he just assumes that she'll move in with him instead of the other way around. Then after a wedding dress gets warped to Hilda after my time is wasted, Hilda says she'll go to the courthouse to look for a loophole. Why did they put this off until the last minute? Why is she asking Salem to come with her? After Zelda says she'll eat to forget her problems, the doorbell rings and Sabrina greets Harvey with a kiss. Amy says that Harvey insisted on asking Sabrina to go to the mall. Why was Harvey headed to the mall with Amy at all? He'd hate her because she mistreats Sabrina and he's acting in love with her now. They hear Zelda complaining and Sabrina lies that her aunt is sick and closes the door saying that it might be contagious. He calls her out for kissing him, and Amy says she's riding the back seat in case he's infected. It'd already be too late, wouldn't it? Then Shinji and his friends show up because Melbourne's planned wedding is already in the Other Realm headlines. The teacher called off the magic class for tonight, with no explanation that she's calling it off to go to the wedding because she's such a big fan of him. So it's just a contrived excuse for them to go see the wedding. They could have gone to see it because it wasn't magic class day today. And Sabrina is apparently too polite to burst their bubble by telling them that their idol is forcing the woman to marry him. What is he, Bowser? He could brainwash her into being happy about it, but that'd be even creepier. Here, I'm assuming he's just hoping she'll warm up to him because he thinks she's so great. But it's idiotic. He could just zap up Zelda that likes him no matter what and leave her alone. Hilda finally found something in the contract that caught her attention, and tells Salem to keep looking for any papers with Metal's name on it. Maybe if she froze time, she wouldn't be able to actually move any of the shelves or papers, so no wonder she doesn't do that. Zelda puts her dress on and says it's excellent. She gets warped to the chapel that even witches want to get married in. They'd at least call it something else. Why would anyone not realize Zelda's a woman? Sabrina apologizes to Zelda because her class invited themselves to the wedding. Too bad no one's thinking to just brainwash Melbourne into changing his mind about this. At least have Zelda explain that she won't do it because she thinks brainwashing is wrong. Sabrina notices that her anti-hex teacher is here, and Hilda shows up right when the priestess for a change asks why they shouldn't be married. Her timing is so fiction-y. Hilda says the contract is void because Metal's already married to Miss Hexworth. So it's a complete underwhelming writer cop-out. A deus ex machina. It's unacceptable because her name is Miss Hexworth, not Mrs. I don't even recognize her. She should have been Professor Lashat instead. He can't remember marrying her because he was hit in the head by a flying boot while fighting and had amnesia when he returned. You don't actually get amnesia from a head injury. She says she never said a thing about it because she didn't want him to feel like he had to be with her. I'm not sure that's how wives actually react to that sort of thing. And Sabrina uses magic to hit him with a boot, and somehow that alone restores all of his memories, make him want to marry the other woman instead. Logically, he was just brainwashed. He'd have more problems than amnesia, and he definitely wouldn't get any memories back from a head injury. I'm glad this plot point is finally being resolved, but they could have just conjured up a woman and brainwashed him into marrying her instead. Couldn't she have cast a spell to return his memories? Couldn't she have used a potion? This whole plotline never would have happened. The story ends with the ants being desperate again, and Salem asks when they'll learn to give up. At least they weren't trying in the 70s series, which means I wasn't getting irritated with them more and more the more they failed to make relationships stick, because it was all just wasting my time. In the next story, Salem complains that he doesn't get any respect around here. Hilda asks what he's complaining about because he gets a good home, and Sabrina wants them to hear him out. They treat him better in this comic than in the sitcom. He thanks Sabrina and says he'd love gourmet cat food and a luxury cat bed. He's reminded that he was transformed as a punishment. And Salem says if he had known he'd be caught, he never would have tried controlling people's will to do his own bidding. She comforts him with television and gets shown a cat show. She tells him he should enter, and once again he refuses to compete with all the snobby, pampered cats. The 90s comic already did a pet show story, but to be fair, it never got to the point where it actually started the show. The 2000s comic did this too! Twice! When he's told the grand prize is a lifetime supply of gourmet cat food, cat toys, a great cat bed, and condo, he wants to win, even though Hilda refused to give him that stuff. Meaning that they might not let him keep that prize anyways if they wouldn't even zap it up for him. If he simply asked Sabrina to zap him up the prize to avoid the cat show, like would make sense since he doesn't want to enter, that'd be smarter. But then we could see Hilda get rid of it because he's a cat as a punishment. Sabrina uses magic to get dressed and have Salem's papers. Salem relatably finds traveling in a cat carrier undignified, and thankfully, when he talks to the cat, it just says meow instead of confusing me. Somehow the owner of the cat assumes that Sabrina was the one expressing admiration of his cat, even though Salem would have a male voice, unmistakable for a girl's. The guy wastes time bragging about his cat and says like a snob that he can't just have his pet mixing with non-purebred show cats. So Salem easily wins the challenges, being obedient and wearing a witch's hat with a broom below him. I like Sabrina's subtle hint that she's a witch. He says that was humiliating, and Sabrina tells him that if he wins, he'll get to spend time with that purebred cat that he probably shouldn't want to date because he's got a human mind and she doesn't. He easily goes through a ring of fire in the talent competition. I think there's no way the ring of fire would be allowed. It's too dangerous. He actually does win the competition. Oh good, he does get the prize. After the guy admits that he misjudged Salem and would be proud to let him be with his princess. Salem already met a white cat named Princess. The story ends with them having the grand prize at home. And Hilda's happy for them instead of wanting to get rid of that stuff. In the comedy page, Salem thanks Hilda for letting him drive. Go figure, a cop sees him. Why did she even bother? She could have cast a spell so that people would see him as her, and see her as him. The cop says that cat had better have a license. She could just magic one up, and that'd make a better ending, because he could faint at seeing the photo. But instead she pointlessly says that he's had all his shots. Wouldn't she just brainwash the cop into letting them get away and forgetting about them? In the next story, Hilda tells Sabrina to shut her window before she falls asleep because she doesn't want Jack Frost nipping at her nose. Let me guess, Jack Frost will turn out to be a real god in this comic. Sabrina sarcastically says she's funny and decides to ignore her because she's impossibly stupid in this comic, just to force the plot to happen, even though Salem's warning her not to. So there's no excuse. I closed the window before going to bed just fine. She says that fresh air at night helps her sleep, and she ignores Salem being cold. Why doesn't she let him sleep in her bed? She wakes up the next day with blue skin because of this. The writers really are stretching to think of ways to punish Sabrina for being a witch. Hilda freaks out about this instead of instantly using magic to undo it. At the very least, she could reverse time. She explains that Jack Frost nipped her on the nose, and when he needs Winter help, he'll transform magical beings like her into frost elves like himself. I'm forced to just assume his spell is too powerful for her to undo it directly. So the idiot who didn't think to tell Sabrina this lore a lot earlier creates a sun globe around her to chase away the winter blues. The bad guy shows up, telling her to frost the day. He gets mad at what happened, and then acts cowardly around Hilda and says he was just doing his job. A job that wouldn't be needed. Science alone creates winter. He says he has this big storm coming up and is really overworked. Hilda says that he should have just asked her for help. And Sabrina naturally says that she'd love to create a snowstorm because it means no school for her. Hilda says it was a great idea to warp to a Caribbean getaway. And ends with Jack Frost there too, with an ice globe around him, which would defeat the purpose of sunbathing. And he'd attract attention with it too, so why did they do that? At least he thanked them, but why? That was easy. Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 54. Landra tells Sabrina it was a great idea to have a slumber party with their charm school friends. Landra's been boring. When she's not in the jungle, taking advantage of the one thing that's unique about her as a Sabrina character, it's just boring and disappointing. She might as well just be a generic teenage girl. Combine that with the fact that she doesn't have the same design as before, and she doesn't feel like Landra. Sabrina thanks her, and zaps up Mortal Realm junk food, which they like. She gets thanked, and decides to do some magic makeovers, including on herself. After that took advantage of them being witches, it's back to boredom again. They decide to talk about boys. Medusa says that since any boy who looks at her turns to stone, making me have to assume she's only allowed to be around girls and is sectioned off from the other students, she's been working on anti-petrification spells. It's confusing that she hasn't succeeded at it yet. And her parents haven't cast them yet. Wouldn't she just have to read a spell from the magic book? Or use a potion? There would be a potion for it, wouldn't there? Her friends say they'd help her with that, and she thanks them. I mean, if there was a way to help her with it, why would mere charm school students be able to cure it? Why wouldn't it be cured already? Then the story wastes my time doing character shilling of Shinji's bad character design again, so they're not relatable. Landra has a good point in only dating wizards. Her friends want to come up with a way to see how Harvey would react if he found out Sabrina was a witch. All they'd have to do is have her use magic in front of him, and then they could erase his memory if it goes wrong. You'd think that would have already been done, considering how bad Sabrina is at hiding it. So this plot would never happen. They want to check the spell encyclopedia. I'd rather they call it the magic book because it's shorter and easier to type, and has a lot more precedent. Sabrina shows morality by saying that mind reading is wrong. Unlike the 70s comic Sabrina, who did it no problem, taking advantage of being a witch. She's told she can transport herself into Harvey's dream and communicate with him and see his reaction. It's a foregone conclusion it won't be good. He broke up with her for being a witch in the sitcom. I just have to assume it was because she kept using magic on him. Sabrina's told to close her eyes lying down and concentrate on Harvey. She goes into Harvey's dream and is complimented on her appearance, and is asked if she wants to get some pizza with him and the guys. She says she wants to talk alone and reluctantly tells him that she's a witch. He's shocked rather than thinking that she's just joking, which the 70s series would have him think. She reveals the truth, and he says it sounds like fun with a nervous smile, and says to show him a spell. She just did. That's why she got a hat. He says that was great, as I wonder if he's only being so open-minded because he's in a dreaming state. It doesn't have to be just a dream. And the story would be pointless if it didn't permanently change the status quo. She conjures up magical sundaes for him, and agrees to zap his homework so he can get straight A's. She agrees immediately with no lecture, and agrees to zap the lawn so he won't have to mow it. Predictably, he asks for too much, and the story ends with her changing her mind about telling him the truth, but still liking him, because who could blame him? The sitcom didn't show him as like this. He was just wary about her witchcraft and didn't really want to get involved anymore. In the comedy page, Sabrina needs Esmeralda to do her homework, but not in the same room as the TV she'll be watching. She stupidly leaves her unsupervised for some reason. Esmeralda has to do a transformation spell and turn Salem into a dinosaur. She already did a transformation spell on Salem for that exact same reason. In the next story, Salem says that a cat from a sci-fi TV show is in town, and he looks just like him, and somehow he doesn't see the resemblance. He assumes he's an egomaniac, and decides to go through the alley and see if there's any fish heads to eat from the fish market. That'd be convenient. Predictably, he meets him. I wonder if they'll switch places and then want their old lives back. You know, some people wouldn't get the motivation to read a story if the plot is so predictable. Stormy says he just needs a little quiet because the bookstore is packed with adoring fans. How is he standing upright and gesturing like a normal person? They all want his paw print on the new book that his human wrote. Predictably, he wants to be a normal cat. Salem decides to trade places. Stormy gets the ants irritated with him because he can't talk to them, so they think he doesn't like Hilda's new dress. Salem's told that a bubble bath will ruin his coat. Huh? Aren't baths good for you? He's told they'll have to recondition his fur. He's offered a salad because he can't overdo it on the food. Aren't cats carnivores? In fact, I remember reading on the Garfield TV Tropes page that cats aren't meant to exclude meat from their diet. So this isn't very good for him. Sabrina's told what's going on by her aunts, and zaps up a comfy new bed and snack to try to cheer Salem up. You'd think Stormy would rub up against her legs, or at least purr to thank her. so that Hilda wouldn't complain as much. He burps, so he's told to go outside until he's ready to communicate, being called a smart mouth. That was mean of her. He's expected to spend the whole night outside. You'd think if Sabrina actually had a conscience, she'd get him inside for the night. Salem's woken up at 5 a.m. I wonder if it's realistic that this human is talking to him so much as if he can understand him. So the cats reunite and go back to their normal lives. Salem unnecessarily insults Hilda's dress as clown-like, so he gets picked up, and she wants to be insulted again because they're just happy to have him back to normal. So he thinks that they're nuts. In the next story, Sabrina reads Esmeralda a bedtime story about Sleeping Beauty, and she thinks it's lame for having no evil trolls or giant spiders. Sabrina acts condescending, assuming that she'd keep her up with nightmares all night by reading her story with action and excitement. Hilda says she's right about the lame, handsome prince thing because that never happened to her, and no one would wake up Sleeping Beauty today because there aren't any princes. She's asked if that could really happen. Hilda says there's a spell that sends a woman into a sleep that can only be broken by a kiss from a man who loves her. Why is that in the magic book? It wouldn't be legal. I guess Enchantra is enchanted to be immune to magic, because someone could have used that on her. She refuses to read that spell out loud because it put her to sleep, and not someone else. Let me guess. That happened to someone. Somehow, some way, Hilda says the entire sleeping spell properly in her sleep, when obviously people don't speak that clearly in their sleep. Well, that was a stupid way to force the plot. I'm done taking the story seriously now. It would have been easier to buy if Enchantra did it to her out of spite. Or at least some enemy of hers. Somehow Esmeralda thinks she can wake her up with instruments. Sabrina says she has to find a man who loves her. But after a ton of men are invited, none of them wake her up. Even after 1,000 men kiss her. Isn't it immediately obvious that they don't love her? Somehow, they go through every single guy in the other realm. All of them got to kiss her while she was unconscious. This is a dark story. At least she wasn't aware of it. I can't believe this happened in a kid's comic. Ambrose naturally refuses to kiss his aunt on the lips. Sabrina decides to have a look at the spell book again. She could have done this while the guys were kissing her one by one. Conveniently, it doesn't have to be romantic love, which is definitely a writer cop-out because that's not how it was in Sleeping Beauty. If it's meant to be a curse, why would it have any way of waking her up? Let alone be so broad. So Salem has to kiss her, which she's not happy about. She wakes up and says she owes him an apology, pets him, is asked if she's okay by Ambrose, and somehow she immediately coughs up a hairball. The first story is about Zelda getting out of marrying her ex-husband, because Hilda finds out that his ex-wife is here, and he's actually still married to him. And somehow the plot happened instead of her using a potion to restore his memories of her. Not to mention there are so many ways that Zelda could have used magic to get out of this. In the second story, Salem wants some luxury cat items. The writer gets lazy by once again having a pet show story. Salem wins. At least I can say that every pet show story goes a different way, because Salem was dressed like a witch at one point. And there was somehow a ring of fire allowed. I assumed the writer would find some dumb excuse to cheat him out of the prize. And then there's yet another story that forces Sabrina to get punished for being a witch by forcing supernatural beings to be on Earth for no reason. This time Jack Frost nips Sabrina's nose because she didn't close her window on a winter night. Somehow she was dumb enough to do that despite being told not to. So she gets marked to be enslaved to create a snowstorm, because he's overworked. Because somehow frost elves are needed to create snowstorms. Science could do that without them though. Why would there need to be more snowstorms created? At least there was a happy ending. It wasn't depressing as it could have been because Sabrina suddenly cheers up about creating a snowstorm because she wants a snow day. So why did they have to have this drama about being hired by him? Why did they have to be opposed to it? The first story is a waste of time where, go figure, Sabrina finds out that Harvey would take advantage of her if he found out she was a witch. She was at least responsible enough to do it in his dream, and she got the idea during a sleepover. Then after an uncreative story where Salem and a Salem look-alike switch places, which rips off Prince and the Pauper. And go figure, he finds out that the life of a celebrity is exhausting. There's a story where Hilda becomes the victim of a Sleeping Beauty curse, because she somehow said it in her sleep. So, that was dumb. We could have just had an enemy of hers curse her. That would have been easier to believe. And it's pretty creepy that they had every guy in the other realm somehow kiss her. Why didn't they try Salem kissing her immediately? Why did they take so long to find out there was a loophole and it didn't have to be romantic love?